Alright then gang, so arrow functions are a more modern addition to the JavaScript language, and they offer us a cleaner and shorter way to write functions. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this function that is a regular function, we've already seen this, to calculate the area, and I'm going to turn this into an arrow function and show you how we do this. So I'll keep this here as reference, but what I'm going to do is come down here and create a new constant, and I'm going to call this calc area. It's the same name, but we'll comment this one out later on. And when we create an arrow function, we set it equal to, first of all, parentheses. We don't use the function keyword. So the parentheses right here, they take in any parameters that we have. So we have the radius. So let's pass that in. Then we do an arrow, which is equals, and then the chevron. And then we open up our code block. At the end, we can still do our semicolon. Now inside this code block, this is where we do the function body, which is this kind of thing right here. So now then, this is an arrow function version of this regular function, and it's just a bit shorter. We don't have to write out the function keyword right here, so it's a bit easier to create. Now if I comment out this thing, I'm calling this function right here, so it should work. So let me save it and come over to the browser, and we can see that we get 78.5 for the area. So this is still working, this arrow function. Okay, it's just a newer and shorter way to write functions. Now we can simplify this even more. The first way we can simplify this is using these parentheses, or rather taking them away. When we only have one parameter, we can take away these parentheses, and this is still going to work. If I save it and refresh, we can see we still get that. Now this only works when there's exactly one parameter. If we were to pass in two parameters, then we need the parentheses. So radius and then something else. We need the parentheses there when there's more than one parameter. Likewise, if there's no parameters, we also need the parentheses there. We can't just take them away because that wouldn't be an arrow function. We need the parentheses there when there's 0 parameters or more than one. But if there is just one parameter, we can take away the parentheses like that. Okay. So the next thing we can do, when we just have a single return like this on one line, we can actually take away the return keyword, and we can scoot it up to the same line over here, and we can take away the code block curly braces, like so. And now what this does is return this value. Even though we don't write out the return keyword like that, it still returns the value. Look, if we try to return here on one line, we get a squiggly line under it, meaning that's not what we're meant to do. We just write out the value that we want to return. If I wanted to return a value which was hello, I write it there and it would return that. And then this right here would get the value of hello, whatever is returned. I don't want to do that. I want to return this thing, which is the area. If I save it now and run it, then this still works. So this kind of syntax, if you're comparing it to this, is now a lot shorter and a lot easier to write. So remember, one parameter, and we can remove the parentheses any more and we need them, or any less and we need them. And if we're just returning something very simply on one line, we can move it up to the next line, remove the return keyword, and also remove the curly braces. So there is another major difference between a regular function like this and an arrow function. And that is to do with the binding of the this keyword, which we've not covered yet. And that means there will be times when arrow functions shouldn't necessarily be used. But I don't want to delve into that just yet. It's beyond the scope of this video, pun intended, but we will cover that at a later time. Now, as a little exercise, just to get used to arrow functions, what I've done is I've created some regular functions down here. So I'm just going to cut those and I'm going to paste them up here, like so, and delete all this space. We don't need that. And I'm going to just get rid of all this because we don't need these anymore. And what we're going to do is just practice turning regular functions into arrow functions. So right here we have another simple regular function. So if you want to pause the video right here and try it out for yourself, then unpause and watch how I do it. That's absolutely fine. But what I'm going to do now is do an arrow function version of this function. So I'm going to say const greet is going to be equal to a function. We don't have any parameters, so we need the parentheses. Then we do our arrow. Then we do our code block. I'm going to return hello world. Now, because we're doing a simple return on one line, we can remove that keyword, and we can also scoot this up and remove these things right here. So this is the arrow function version of this. And if I try to call this now, I'm going to call greet, and I'm going to comment out this so there's no conflict and save it. This should work. Oops, we need to log it to the console. So let's say const test or result is equal to this because we're returning a value, and that's going to be stored in result now. So now we can say console.log results and save it and preview, and we can see that. Okay, so let's do the next example. I'm going to comment that one out and uncomment this. This one's a little more complex. So we have this const called bill right here set to a function, and it takes in 2 parameters. Then inside, we're creating this local variable called total, and we're cycling through the products. So we can see that products must be some kind of array, and for each product, we're getting a total, and we're adding the product value plus any kind of tax. Okay, so just a simple formula. Then in the end, we're returning the total. So this is more than just a simple return statement. Now, what I'm going to do is come down here, and I'm just going to console.log, and we're going to console.log the bill function, and we're going to pass in a couple of parameters, or arguments in this case. So the first one is the product, and this is going to be an array of prices, essentially. So we're going to take in the first one, which is 10, we'll do 15 and 30. After that, we need a second argument, which is the tax, and that's just going to be 0.2 for 20%. Now, I'm logging this directly in the console instead of storing this in some kind of variable and then logging it to the console like we did here, but this is exactly the same, okay? It's just a shorter way of doing it. We're logging it directly. Okay, so we have that. Let's just make sure it works, save it, and we get this as the total over here, 66. So we know what it should be. So we're taking those products in, we're cycling through them. For each one, we're adding to the total variable over here. We're taking the product price plus any tax on that price, which is 0.2 times the product price. Then we're returning the total. So let's convert this now into an arrow function. So what I'm going to do is say const bill is equal to parentheses. We have more than one parameter, so we need our parentheses. We take in the products, and we also take in the tax. Then we need our arrow, then the curly braces. Then we'll do our semicolon. Okay, so inside this function, what we're going to do is create the local variable, so total equal 0. And in fact, we can just copy this stuff right here. We don't need to totally rewrite it again, like so. Now, we can't shorten this to one line because we have all of this extra logic right here, and that doesn't work with arrow functions on one line. It only works when we have one simple return statement, like we did up here. We're just returning something simple, or with the area example. In here, we have a lot more logic, so we can't just scoot this up to one line, but we can still have an arrow function, which is still a bit shorter than a regular function, okay? So this is the arrow function version of this. There's not that much difference. We just remove the function keyword and add on the arrow. That's all we're doing essentially. So let me comment this out and make sure this one still works. We're calling it down here, save it and preview, and we still get 66. So then, a lot of the time in this course, I will be using arrow functions as we go forward. So if you ever need a refresher, do come back to this video. And like I said, there is another major advantage of arrow functions in some cases when it comes to the this keyword. Sometimes it's a disadvantage, and we'll talk about that later on.